everybody. Welcome to the Weathering Together podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. Today, I'm inviting you into episode 2 of the Weathering Together podcast. Today's guest is my good friend, Jenny Baker. Jenny, along with her husband, Franklin, is the race director of the Georgia Jewel. That's where I first met Jenny. I've come to discover Jenny wears a lot more hats than the Georgia Jewel. She'll share some of those hats with us today, but more importantly, what we're going to talk about today is what she has discovered about herself and about relationships through all of those hats we wear. Because really, the hats we wear, the meaning, the value, the joy found in any of those hats almost always boils down to the relationships we have underneath the hat. So Jenny's going to talk about that today. As I listened to our conversation again, I kept thinking this is really a master class of sorts on relationships. And if you boil it down a little bit further to the nuggets of that, we spend a lot of time talking about vulnerability, authenticity, pathways to this discovery of who we really are and this longing we have to be in relationship with one another. So not going to talk much more about it. I'm anxious to hand you over to my conversation with Jenny Baker. Welcome, Jenny.
All right. Well, this is like the best way to start a day. I have a new podcast journey I'm on. Maybe some of you listened last week to my first episode of the Weathering Together podcast. But in reality, if I look back, and we're going to talk about that today, Jenny Baker, who I have here, probably planted the seed where I am today, this podcast and what I hope it will be, with a conversation we had 4 years ago that I thought was about running, but really ended up being something completely different from running itself, or maybe it was about one of the most meaningful parts of running. So all of that to welcome and say, Jenny, welcome to the Weathering Together podcast. And it's so good. I just love my conversations with you. So I'm excited about this.
Oh my gosh, good morning. I am too. Thank you for inviting me back. It's been 4 years and you're not done with me yet. So I feel like I'm winning already today. And I love the title of this podcast. I love your intentions for it because, I mean, honestly, you and I are friends, and anything I've ever said that has stuck with anyone is because somebody else first weathered something with me and invested in me. So I think that this is a fantastic concept, and I'm honored to be here.
Yeah. So I am going to actually play about a 4-minute clip from a conversation that you and I had back in April of 2018. So I'm just going to play it first for folks to listen to. And this will really be at the heart of what you and I will talk about here in this conversation. So I'm going to play this. So tell me, what's the most rewarding thing that you have seen there at the Georgia Jewel, or the most rewarding things, just the stories that make you glad you said, I want to be this race director? Clearly God put that on your heart, or God threw you into it without letting you think about it, but it seems to be something you really love doing. Why is that?
When you put yourself in an environment where you physically are stripped of control and strength, you're able, conversations happen that are a lot more vulnerable and authentic. And I enjoy being in moments like that with people where we're having genuine, authentic conversations. I enjoy being on the trail with people. I mean, we have business CEOs. I mean, we have people who work on the show Survivor. We have people who are business partners with some famous country singer that I don't know very well, but is very popular, named Zach Brown. Like, we have really successful people that come run, and you get on the trail, and they're just your trail friends. It doesn't matter how much money you have in your bank account when you're on the trail. It doesn't matter what kind of car you drive. It doesn't matter what kind of house you live in. Everybody is equal on the trail, and everybody is honest on the trail. And so having the opportunity to be in relationship with people like that, where we're having these genuine conversations and a genuine experience, gives me the chance to love people differently than the world loves them, and allows me to know them in a different way than the world would ever want to know them, in an environment that is conducive to being open and honest. And so people leave the weekend, and I always say, I want people to feel like they've been to my home at the finish line. Like, I want them to feel like they're sitting around my kitchen table being served and taken care of when they cross that finish line. And then when people leave, I want them to say, there is something different about the Georgia Jewel and Team Baker. And what is it? What is different about them? And it's that verse in the Bible that talks about taste and see that the Lord is good. We want to give people a taste of genuine God love, so that there's something that they come back for out of curiosity, and because it's a love that maybe they've never experienced any other place in their life. So I think my favorite thing about the Jewel is people coming back the next year, and not because they think the course is great, or, I mean, there are plenty of other races here in, the area that are as beautiful as our race, and maybe even more beautiful than our race. But people come back to see us every year, because they feel loved and known and valued. And so when somebody comes back, to me, that's one of the most rewarding things about race directing.
So a little background.
Man, that was really smart.
Well, you and I were talking before I hit record. It's like, in my world, in my personal life, looking back where I was 4 years ago and where I am now, those were the most prophetic words that I've ever heard as they apply to my life. So a little background, and so Jenny is the race director, along with her husband Franklin, of the Georgia Jewel. That interview you just listened to a clip of was me interviewing Jenny after I had registered for my first Georgia Jewel, and she agreed to come on and just let me pick her brain about what's this experience going to be like. And I will say that I have been back twice since that first experience, which was a nightmare in many ways, other than discovering this aspect of the race that Jenny talked about in that clip, which is relationship, vulnerability, authenticity. And to be honest, Jenny, I was thinking about that this morning. Today, there are probably few words I use more than vulnerability and authentic. 4 years ago, like when you said, like, I remember being so off, like that was not the answer I was expecting. Vulnerability, authenticity about a trail race. I'm not even sure I knew what those words meant 4 years ago. And today they are critical to who I am, what I want, and I think what the world needs to have more of. So I just want to say one thing, and then I want to ask you some questions about this. I have come to believe that we were created by God to be in a meaningful relationship with Him. First and foremost, that's at the core of what I've come to believe about my relationship with God. I believe that is so because within that relationship, He wants us to know that is where we will experience the most joy that we can find anywhere in this world. I think his pathway for us discovering that is meaningful relationships with one another. At the heart of that relationship with God is he wants us to be able to freely come to him as we are, completely vulnerable, completely authentic. I don't think those two words are that much different the more I start to use them. They're interchangeable in a lot of ways. And I think we discover the way to do that by having meaningful, vulnerable, authentic conversations with one another. And one of the things that struck me about what you said in that clip this morning, when I listened to it right before that it really wasn't even a talking point I had put down, but then it became like the main thing once I heard you say it this morning. You said, I enjoy being a part of those moments. And don't forget the question I asked. I asked Jenny, what is the most meaningful part of being a race director? Like anybody who's been at the Georgia Jewel knows, like, the best experience ever is getting to that finish line. And there's Jenny Baker and that big smiling face and a big hug. For some of us, it's like, dear God, this is over. But so with all that said, and looking back at that, I just want to start with this word vulnerable and why you think that your race produces that opportunity for folks. Why, when you start talking about creating a space that people will want to come back to, where does vulnerability fit into that?
I have this new, I don't know, saying that I've really been kind of chewing on, when you hear something or you consider something and it just sticks with you. And it can be said a lot of different ways, but if you can't live it, you can't lead it. And so if we want to create, if we want to innovate, if we want to change, we can't lead that if we're not living certain things. And whether you're research minded or intuitive, however you make choices, there is overwhelming evidence, both scientific evidence and then just experiential, that shows that vulnerability leads to meaning, leads to purpose, and people who live a life on purpose are happier, live longer, are more creative, are more generous. And so vulnerability really is taking an emotional risk. And it's taking an emotional risk, but also being positioned for other people to take an emotional risk with you. And for me, I grew up probably like a lot of people being told that emotions are not good. They can deceive you. They're not, helpful. And so going into college and my career, anything that was vulnerable and emotional was weak and bad. So you don't, especially as a woman, like women are already known to be emotional. So I cannot, in fact, a president of a company a few weeks ago I was doing work for, we'd made this video, we were watching it together, and it was a really moving video. And I got a little teary-eyed, and I'm like, every time I watch that video, I still get teary-eyed. And he said, now, when we present this, you can't get emotional. And I said, well, I know. And he goes, no, you know why? Implying that as a woman, I'm already stereotyped to be emotional. And if I feed into that and perpetuate it, then I'm just perpetuating this. And so there are these microaggressions and there are these stereotypes that we equate with emotion or showing truly who we are and how we feel in any moment. And so vulnerability has been equated with weakness. What I've experienced for me is that vulnerability has led to some of the most profound breakthroughs I have ever had in my life and has led to a greater sense of freedom to be who I truly am. There is nothing more stifling, and we've talked about this, there's nothing more stifling than living a life that is false to your true identity. And vulnerability is that door that opens up this area of freedom to truly be who we are. And on the trail, and why I enjoy being in those spaces with people when they are able to be that, is because it's relief, it's peace. And when we all think of those moments where we finally stepped into who we are separate of what anybody else says we should be, even if it's hard and scary and uncomfortable, there is still a weight that's lifted off of our shoulders that gives us levity and brings that peace and joy. So that's why I like being in that space with people, because I love people who are living empowered lives that are free and meaningful.
Well, and I will say, I personally, when I talk about my Georgia Jewel experience, and I've talked a lot about it the last 4 years, and certainly, the miles become part of it. I failed the first year I went, and then second year I didn't even show up. And then finally in 2020, I guess I got it done. So there's a ton of storylines with the Georgia Jewel. When you and I were talking here a minute ago, I was like, I could write a book on how the Georgia Jewel has changed my life. But the first chapter wouldn't be about miles. It wouldn't be about moving mountains. It wouldn't be about overcoming. It would be about discovering me. It would be about discovering me through vulnerability and through relationship. Now, I do a lot of work these days around trauma, and just really a lot of work around how folks who haven't had loving, caring, nurturing relationships in the earliest days of their life, that really works against them in a lot of ways. It works against them in long-term health. Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey wrote a book, What Happened to You? And I love what Dr. Perry says in that book. He says, we love like we learn to love. And yes. I think a lot of that is that, well, let me back up. So I do these presentations and I do these trainings, and people kind of get it. Like, it starts to make sense for a lot of people because they're in a space where they can realize, oh, so my past really has had some real impact on who I've become. And there's a lot of light bulbs and aha moments, which lead people then to say, okay, now what? Like, what's the answer now? What's the answer in a classroom? What's an answer in the judicial system? What's an answer in my family? What's an answer in my friendships? And I always say, well, there's a lot of answers, but every one of them start with relationship, relationship, relationship. And you kind of get this response, and people say, yeah, but what? People want to skip that relationship piece.
Yes.
And I always say there's a reason for that. And that reason is because we are all, generally speaking, really bad at relationships. And I boil that down now to the one common denominator in our badness at relationships is this either a resistance to, an incapability of, somehow not having the capacity for vulnerability. I have said I have built some relationships in my life that didn't work out on being able to have the easy conversations, on being able to do the easy stuff. Then one day the hard stuff comes along and you discover, wait a minute, like this, I'm not good at this part. And so you talked about stereotyping. I think that's one piece of this. What else makes it so? Because here's what we're talking about, and you and I had this conversation: vulnerability, authenticity. I read recently, connected relationships are all about radical honesty, not just honesty, but radical honesty, authenticity, vulnerability. To me, it's all the same. And if you write it on paper, like that doesn't sound like such a hard thing to do. Like, I'm just going to tell you, I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you how I'm feeling. I'm going to tell you what's going on here. But there are not a lot of people who do that.
Yeah.
Why?
It's interesting. So if you look at kids, so I have a 9 and an 11-year-old, and I've not had to teach them how to react whenever they're hurt. They just naturally know how to act when they're hurt. Now, as they get older, what I'm watching is that instead of being fully in the moment when they're hurt, whether it's emotional hurt or physical hurt, my 11-year-old daughter is starting to put up walls where she's not communicating the hurt in an honest way. She's communicating it in a different way that feels safer for her. So she will, she's very clever and very quick. So some of the comments that she makes back, like when I say, hey, I need you to fold the laundry, that was your chore today, she looks in and she goes, well, these are your clothes, why don't you fold them? We have that conversation, because then she'll go, that's what you tell me, that I need to be responsible for my stuff. This is your stuff, be responsible. But she will, when she is emotionally hurt and feels disconnected, she will react in anger instead of hurt. And so culturally, and all cultures are different. In our culture, we have labeled some emotions as good and some as bad. And so for us, anger is acceptable, but shame and pain and guilt are not acceptable. So what you see, especially, in the climate that we are all existing in now, is anger, 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 or apathy, because it's easier and safer for me to just not engage and feel than it is for me to either be really, really angry or sad or disappointed. And neither of the extremes are helpful. So what we have to realize is that our emotions, like, we just have to completely shift the narrative. Our emotions are not bad. They are helpful in terms of gateways to helping us self-discover. And self-discovery happens really powerfully through relationships. And I would say, while vulnerability and authenticity can feel and sound similar, vulnerability is really, authenticity is me showing up the same way in every space with every person, no matter what. There is a consistency to how I show up that is true to who I am. So, this. There are things that I say here in this interview that are going to sound very similar to how I speak at the finish line at the Jewel, to how I speak in a meeting with the company I'm doing work for. Right. Whenever we can step into that space of fully being who we are, we're able to be authentic in all spaces. Vulnerability, though, is the depth that I choose to go with how transparent I am in a given situation. And I love, so there's therapy. So I've done therapy I think everybody should do therapy. I've done therapy for like a bazillion thousand years. So my therapist oftentimes will say, I'll give him a scenario. Hey, this is the conversation I'm having and I'm not sure how to find my way out of it. And he'll say, well, how vulnerable do you want to be? And he has me answer that question first, because there are some people I do not need to be fully vulnerable in front of. And I like to follow the life of Jesus as a role model. And so when you look at Jesus's life, Jesus was very careful in how vulnerable he was in different spaces. So with the people who were trying to shut him down, kill him, he wasn't like opening up all of his teachings and being like, hey guys, come on in, let me tell you all about my stuff. He saved that for his inner circle. And so if Jesus displayed emotional intelligence and shifting in vulnerability, then I probably can too. So being vulnerable isn't just, verbally vomiting all the time in every space, everything that you feel. It requires wisdom. And there are moments, and when we get into this hate versus apathy in the middle of it, there are people who are not in a space to explore what they're really feeling, and they don't have the tools to do it. And going back to what you said growing up, some of us have more tools in our toolbox than other people do. And so wisdom comes in with vulnerability and knowing what this person who I'm in a relationship with, even if it's just one conversation, I am currently in a relationship with this person. It's being able to put wisdom on that situation and say, okay, I may have more tools in my toolbox right now to take this a little bit more vulnerable, but this person doesn't. And so instead of projecting shame and judgment on them, I'm going to give them what I want, and I'm going to give them grace and freedom to just be who they are in this moment. Yeah. And that one choice of wisdom can counteract blow up conversations, where you're all together with friends or family at the dinner table and one person mentioned, it happened at Christmas at my family. We have different opinions on the political climate, and one person just makes one little comment, and in that moment we have a choice. Do we react to it, or do we pause and with empathy make a reflective statement and move on? So I don't even remember what the original question was, but authenticity, vulnerability, and then also empathy, but shame. I did want to talk about shame. Shame is a big problem with vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, so I appreciate that sort of breakdown and differentiation between authenticity and vulnerability, because I do think that, and the example you gave of Jesus was always authentic. Like, he was the same dude no matter where he went. But to your point, varying degrees of vulnerability. And one thing you said in that clip, and then one thing you just said here in talking about vulnerability, was a connection to safety. I think creating this safe place is where we're likely to be most vulnerable. And to your point, these emotions we're most comfortable with and are most accepting of, anger never creates a safe space. Silence rarely creates a place where people feel safe. They may feel comfortable to some degree, or that may be easier, but I don't think many people would say I feel safe in silence. So, it's about creating these safe places. I say more and more lately, there's scripture in the Bible that says that we were not created with a spirit of fear. Really, from a God standpoint, there really is no such thing as fear, which is why, to me, we were brilliantly designed that in a baby's earliest moments, when a baby comes into this world absolutely scared to death, they're suddenly in like, holy cow, is just comfortable taking a nap in this nice, warm, dark environment, and now all this. But in the earliest seconds of our life, safety gets defined by somebody showing up. The very first thing mom don't show up to baby and say, are you hungry? Are you tired? They show up and hold them and make them feel safe before they ever start taking any sort of action. And I don't think, like, too often we think, well, that's just a baby thing. No, that's kind of how we got wired. It's an us thing. It's a people thing. First and foremost, we need to feel some sense of safety. We were not wired to be fearful. Our entire system is built to minimize the impact of fear. It was designed to be first and foremost done weathering life together. And so, like, how do we get better then at, like, Georgia Jewel's easy. You send us out into the middle of this crazy mountain trail and say, there ain't nothing else. Like, out there, if you're with the right person, the right environment sort of takes shape just through the nature of what you're doing. How do we do that though in a more thoughtful and planful way when we're not running the Georgia Jewel? How are we doing that at a dinner table? And I think you started to answer that, and maybe did. There's a lot of empathy involved. There's a lot of wisdom in knowing if I really say what I think I want to say right here, it's not going to create a safe space. And if there's not a safe space, there's probably nothing valuable going to happen in this space. I don't know.
Yeah. You know, it's a lot of work is what it is, a lot of intentional work. And you know, just kind of like we all drive. Well, when I was 16 and I was learning to drive, I had to really think about how to drive. And before I started taking driver's ed, I had an unconscious incompetency. I didn't know that I didn't know how to drive. So then I go to driver's ed because my mom took me driving once and said, I can't do this. She's going to kill me. I'm going to send her someplace else to learn how to drive. So I go to driver's ed. I realize that I become conscious of the incompetency. So oh my gosh, now I'm aware that I have an outage. I don't know how to drive. So I learn, I practice, then I shift into, okay, now I have a conscious competency. I know how to do it, but boy, I got to think about it. So at my driving test, you know, my 9 and 3, actually, I think they've changed it now, but when I was getting my driver's license, it was 9 and 3, 10 and 3, whatever it was. So you're thinking, and I'm thinking about, you know, when I parallel park, these are the things I have to do. Well, now at 41, I don't think about that. It is now an unconscious competency because I've done it so many times. It's just habit. Empathy, reflective listening, and pausing to consider. Those are intentional competencies that we have to train ourselves to do because they're countercultural. What is cultural is to just fly off, type up really quickly, keyboard warriors, what I'm thinking to this comment, and not pause to consider what power my actions and my words may have. And it's funny, I learned this, gosh, I was 25 and it was my second job. And my boss was a retired Procter & Gamble executive. And so I would have weekly touch bases with him. I'd come into his office. And one week I was really exasperated with my project manager. So I sit down on Chuck's couch and I said, Chuck, I don't know what we're going to do with her. And he said, what? And I said, I don't know what we're going to do with her. And he said, Baker, he said, in one statement, you just took away any value that she has as a human being. And he stopped me dead in my tracks. And for the first time, I realized I am now in an environment that is countercultural to the way the rest of the world works. Because my previous investment advising position was all about performance. You got to perform. And if you're not, then everybody has permission to judge you, to condemn you, to shame you. All of a sudden, I'm in an environment where performance that's not the primary value. That humanity and the person's value and worth as a human being, separate of anything they ever do, is the priority. And being under that type of leadership, along with a lot of therapy, helped me pause and learn those ways of relating to another human being based on who they are and what they deserve, not what they can perform and achieve and accomplish. And so, we get tons of emails for the Jewel. I get, tons of emails, even from the other things that we do, quick little emails where somebody will send a two sentence email and will say, I can't find this, or I did this, can you please do this? Just very transactional, because that's our culture, very transactional. Yeah. And more times than not, the easiest thing for me to do would just to be check the website, it's on the homepage, or go to the registration page, it's right there on the front. Yeah. But I've learned to recognize the human on the other side of that email. And so, this is how I choose. Not everybody has to do this, but for me, I will go to the website, I will get the web link, and then I will put the link in the email so that they don't have to go find it themselves. I can serve them in a just really quick, easy way and acknowledge their humanity by being generous with my time. And that has to happen more, is a slowing down to offer in these until they become unconscious competencies, until I am just programmed. When somebody sends me a text message early in the morning, so one of my companies that I do work for, one of the executives is brilliant mind, and will just quickly pop off a text message just in the moment while they're thinking. And I could quickly pop back a response. What I've started doing is acknowledging the humanity first and saying, good morning. How are you today? So good to hear from you. You can find this file at blah, blah, blah. And when I slow down, then other people will slow down because they feel safe, they feel invited in, they feel welcomed. And then we're connecting on a human level and not on a performance transactional level. And then there's so much more meaning in that relationship. And what we create and what we produce is so much more impactful and meaningful because we're doing it from a place of relationship rather than performance and transaction.
Yeah.
So that was a lot.
No, but, and to anybody listening, Jenny Baker is, by her own definition of authentic, one of the most authentic people I know. So the Jenny you're listening to now is the Jenny at the Georgia Jewel. She's the Jenny that shows up for her kids. She's the Jenny that shows up at the office. And I say that to say, I think more people should do it the way you do it. You should treat people like you do, clipping the website and honoring their humanity. And I say that because of this. Like in my 4-year career with the Georgia Jewel, I have recruited a lot of people to come do the Jewel. The selling point and the biggest memory people walk away from, the thing they always reach out to me afterward and say is, it's not, you were right, Georgia Jewel was hard. It's not, you were right, that was just like the most meaningful thing I've ever done. It's almost always, you're right, that Jenny Baker and Team Baker they create a loving experience. They create this inclusive experience. They create this place where you get to go feel honored as a person, no matter if you're the slowest person in the back raising my hand or the fastest. So there's something.
Okay. I have gotten to this point, and anything that is created that it feels loving and feels safe is not because of anything I in myself and my own strengths and skills can do. It's because I have been invited into meaningful relationship, like I said in the beginning, and I've been invested in, but I know what it's like to believe that I am only what I produce, that I am only what I perform, and to be reduced to that. I, in college, struggled with an eating disorder, and it was directly linked to this belief of perfection. And it was, my parents never communicated to me that they expected perfection. How silly. But yet, culturally, those were the messages as a woman that I picked up. And quite honestly, to be fully vulnerable, I picked up a lot of that from religion. Religion put a lot of that on me, and I took it. And then in my young mind, I translated it the way that a young mind translates things. And it got to a place of feeling I just wanted approval. I just wanted to be good enough for who I don't know, myself. It was really me. And then the shame of not being good enough. And shame is driven out of a belief that we will lose meaningful connections and not have value. And so then there was this shame that kind of then snuck in. And there were spaces where it was safe to kind of let my guard down and share those struggles. And there were spaces that, nope, I had to put on that face, put on that facade, wear my Sunday best, and have it all together. And it was exhausting. And working through that, I mean, you just get to a place where you just are exhausted and you cannot keep going. I physically could not keep going the way that I was going, but I knew I didn't want to feel those things anymore. I didn't know what to do. And so bits and pieces of my story, I started trusting people with and sharing. I mean, and I started therapy in 2000. I mean, I've done it for now to 22 years because our culture would still have me pulled into that performance thinking. And I've seen it so powerfully in the race world, in our athletic world, that there is this, I am my time, I am my pace, I am my place. And there is nothing more unhealthy and destructive than this belief that we have to be or do to be valuable. And so if there is anything that has propelled us to create the Jewel the way it is the pain that and Franklin has his own story too. It's the pain that we've all experienced in being in spaces where we don't feel loved, valued, worthy of acceptance. Yeah. And I never, ever want to make anybody feel that way, ever. And so I will bend over backwards to be the antithesis of performance in everything I do.
Yeah. And you do
but
it.
I wanted to share that anything we create comes from healing my brokenness, and I still have healing and growth to do. But I have friends like you, and I have a great community of people who we're all on the same journey, and so we make it okay for us to not be perfect. You make it okay for me to say, man, I am really in my head and I'm really down and I'm really struggling. You make it okay. Yeah. And when it's okay, then I have the courage to keep growing through that rather than staying in isolation and not healing and growing through that.
Yeah. No, and so beautifully put. I wrote an article about it. This space I've gotten to is that, and I think there's some shaming in it. I certainly agree with you. Religion has a key piece in this idea that we are working our way towards the space called healed. Like there's this place you're supposed to get to. I've had people ask, folks know I've gone through a broken relationship in my life, and I've had all this friendly advice. Well, wait until you are healed, wait until you've done your work, until you do this next thing. And I've said, what I've come to realize, life isn't about healed. Life is about healing. There's folks who accept that and embrace that, and then there's liars. But once you get to this place of realizing life isn't about getting to healed, life is about embracing healing, that's when you start to discover healing can't happen by myself. It can't happen outside of meaningful relationships built on safety, vulnerability, authenticity, which just goes back to empathy, which goes back to how prophetic your words were 4 years ago when my life looked completely different. And it was like you were somehow predicting where I was going to go, what was going to become meaningful to me. So
what I love. Okay. One of my favorite moments with you.
I'm scared.
Now I have I mean, gosh, I have so many of those moments seared in my head. But my favorite moment with you was when you crossed the finish line in 2020.
Yeah.
And you just sat down and you just sat in it.
Yeah.
And there was no false pretense about you. You were just there in it. And it was almost a sacred space where I knew there was a lot going on, but also knowing to give you space because you were processing a lot of things. But that had to have been because I know all of the feelings that you were sitting there processing and thinking and feeling, and then knowing also what it took to get you to that spot, and then how it's propelled you into other areas. To your point, like if you had a thought or believed that healing is a one and done, that life is you learn it and you move on, you would never have gotten to that seat because you never would have shown up again. And you kept going. You had the tenacity to keep going. And I hope and I think it's because of relationships got you to that space. Now, ultimately, you carried yourself through the race and to that finish line.
No, but no, there's very few people know you are one of them that's sitting in that chair. That race that day was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it was far more emotional. There was just so much going on in my life that was outside of the 37 miles that day. And in all honesty, like, and this speaks to you, like, even that morning of that race, I was like, I mean, in my mind, I was like, okay, the first year I didn't finish. The second year I didn't show up. People, like, nobody's going to be shocked if I just write another story that just couldn't do it again, just wasn't my year again. And I mean, I was there, and it was a text message from you. It was a scriptural sharing that got me there. And then I remember very, very late in the day sending you, or you had sent a text and said, "Where are you?" And I'm almost there. And basically you said, "Well, then get here," and it was that, absolutely, that relationship with you first and foremost. There were a lot of friends that knew the journey I was on who were reaching out during the day. And I actually, at the turnaround point there, ran into Melanie. I don't know if you know Melanie from Cincinnati. She and I had met.
Yes.
She and I had met chasing down Harvey Lewis on his Appalachian Trail. Completely didn't know each other. Just like, we just showed up in Damascus on the same day looking for Harvey. And I hadn't seen her since then, but I saw her at the turnaround point of that 37-mile adventure when I was in my head saying, halfway is good enough. And she come running up and just gives me this big hug. And there was just something energetic in that.
Yes.
And it's,
yes.
Yeah, it's race day, but just
Yep.
to me, it was this force that exists in our human relationships, in a hug, because that's all I needed. Literally, I was able, once I turned around, I knew, like, there's
Yep.
no turning back now. I'll get there now.
I mean, really, there's really not. Like, you're in the middle of the woods. There's really not.
No, it's like at that point. But no, I think it is.
We let you be. And that's the other thing about this human experience and weathering together.
Yeah.
We have to be comfortable with letting people be wherever they are, and not making them, you got to the finish line and you sat down and you just needed to be. And knowing that was okay, that because you and I have that trusting, authentic relationship to where I know when you say, I just need to be, that I just need to let you be. And I just need to sit there and check in with you, but let you be. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in, no, you need to be where I am.
Yes.
You need to be doing you need to think what I'm thinking, feel what I'm feeling. And when we do that, we diminish
Yes.
the entire human experience of that individual.
Yeah.
And I mean, I probably could make a case if you know, in the debate club or whatever, they give you different topics and you have to argue either side. I could probably do that really well because I can be in different spaces and understand how that human has gotten to that point. Doesn't mean I agree with it. It means I can understand how they've gotten to that point. And so when I can just be with that person, then I know it's going to deepen that relationship. So at some point, they're going to reciprocate being with me, and we're going to encourage each other to think differently, to grow together, to explore together. And oh my gosh, it drives some people crazy that I can do that. Like, I mean, you know, you talk about playing both sides of the fence politically. I can debate both sides of every issue because I have people that I love and care about on both sides. And, you know, well, I'll be a little vulnerable here. My mother and I got into a conversation recently where we were talking about abortion.
Yeah.
And she made a statement that was a very it was a very principled statement.
Yeah.
That's the word for it, principled statement. And I said, Mom, have you ever met anybody who chose to abort a pregnancy? And she said, well, no, I've heard stories. And I said, Mom, until you have been in a meaningful friendship with a woman who has chosen that, you cannot say the things that you're saying, because I have never met a woman who aborted a pregnancy and celebrated.
Yeah.
Never.
Right.
And I can say that because I have relationships with people who have made all different choices, and they are no less worthy of love than the person who hasn't chosen an abortion.
Yeah.
Both deserve worth and value. And being able to pause, but be there with my mom and understand her story coming in, you know, is she had a broken marriage. She's had experiences she's bringing in. And so when she makes those principled statements, most often it's not about the people she's making the statements about. Most often it's about her.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I can sit in it with her.
Yeah.
And love her in that. And so this idea of weathering together requires us to be okay with letting people be where they are.
Right. Right. No, it's so perfect. And I call a lot of the work I get to do these days the science of empathy, because what it really suggests is the Jenny I am talking to right now isn't a snapshot of Jenny Baker right now. Jenny Baker that I'm talking to is a product of a lifetime of experiences, a lifetime of experiences. I have no idea in this moment how to understand. Your willingness to just let me be at that finish line had a lot to do with you understanding there's far more to the story than the race he ran today. There's far more to the story of his life before he ever got to Georgia Jewel. And that gets back to this piece of we're not very good at relationships. One, because we're very transactional, and in this culture today, we want transactions not just to happen, we want them to happen quick. Listening and trying to understand somebody's story, that takes time. But I think, and I get really worried about this. I just read a book, Dopamine Nation, and one small piece of this, which fits in with what we're talking about. So it talks a lot about addictions, how, you know, I'm a hobbyist neuroscientist now. I'll read anything brain, and dopamine's one piece of it. But the author, Anna Lemke, I think is her name. So she talks about this idea of how we live in this country and an abundance of dopamine hits, not the least of which I'm looking for my phone, this phone. So we have all of these opportunities to get that dopamine hit. Now, the problem is none of them are enough. Like I scroll, it's not enough. So I move on to the next thing and I'm moving on to this next thing. And there's just all of these opportunities out there to get that dopamine hit. Now, if somebody believes what she loosely suggested, she believes what I strongly believe, goes back to what I said, the greatest joy in life comes from the joy we find in one another experiences. If you believe that, but we're trying to do that in a culture that's selling us on the idea, oh no, there's much greater happiness here, there. She made this suggestion in this comment that we can eventually get to a generation who's never experienced the joy in this, that it will be very complicated to ever get back to having the kind of relationships you and I are talking about today, because we're so happiness driven. And I think happiness and joy are two different things. I think the phone makes us happy. Joy is a choice we make by engaging in relationship with one another. Joy is what we find by being willing to discover who Jenny Baker is, being willing to sit and accept who she is without thinking about who she should be. All of these things we typically do in relationships that are robbing us of joy. And I think in the addiction world that I live in some parts of my life, you know, I have conversations with college kids as part of my part-time role there about substance abuse. But I tell, and you know, I want you to know this, because this conversation we had 4 years ago has put me on a path of shaping this. So you're having an impact on college kids that you never even saw. But I had this conversation with the football team here this past summer. They invite me to come do my talk on alcohol, drugs every year. I had it this summer with them. I didn't mention alcohol. I didn't mention a drug. I didn't mention a substance, other than to say, here's the deal. If any of you end up with a substance abuse problem, that won't be your problem. It'll be your solution. And I'm going to tell you what it's going to be the solution to. We are all going to wake up every single day of our life craving a meaningful relationship. We're created for it. There ain't one morning coming where we wake up and say, it's cool, I don't need relationships. Like, it just is not going to happen, whether we identify it or don't. We're waking up every single morning craving a meaningful relationship. Now, here's the deal. If we don't find it with a someone, which is what we truly want, we all truly long for, and it's what I've discovered in my Georgia Jewel, a meaningful relationship with a someone. If we don't get that, we're going to have a meaningful relationship with a something. Alcohol, drugs, porn, shopping, running. We are going to have a meaningful relationship. So what I told these guys, and I told them, men, this is a really tough deal for men from another angle. I think women have their own side of why is this.
Yeah.
Then the root of it is absolutely men are raised to be emotionless. Big boys
100%.
don't cry. Suck it up.
Yep.
And I told them, like, if you want to have the biggest protective factor in your life against these things, I would sit here and try to scare you away from doing. Don't drink, don't smoke weed, it'll kill you. The greatest protective factor you have of that is each other in this room.
Yes. Yep.
You all cling to each other.
Yep.
Be willing to have the hard conversations with each other. Get rid of the idea big boys don't cry. They absolutely do. And I would argue they absolutely need to with each other. That's what you all need to hear from me. I had more response from that conversation with those young men than I've ever had in any presentation I've ever did. Some of them reached out by email. Some of them stopped by my office, which only reinforced for me, they are all looking for that. When somebody gave them a safe place to consider that this is missing in my life, they could point out that they long for it and they miss it. So
yeah. That's the thing that now I think we're finally getting to culturally is understanding that it's the product of the emotions that we've been trying to cut the fruit off the tree and thinking the tree's going to go away when it just grows back differently. So social media, drugs, alcohol, relationships, shopping, all of those things are just the fruit produced from this lie of that men, and it really, Brene Brown is one of my favorite researchers. Her research overwhelmingly shows that men, when you're looking at vulnerability, their biggest struggle is with this cultural narrative that emotions are weak. Women's lie and biggest struggle is that we have to do it all and not let anybody know that we're exhausted or that we can't do it all. And so two very different manifestations, but the same cause and the same root. And so it doesn't surprise me that message resonated so powerfully. I hope that those men and boys growing up, my Levi, I mean, he told his teacher a couple of weeks ago that he needed to take a break because he was feeling very overwhelmed and anxious. And the teacher called and she was like, I didn't know that kids knew these words. And I'm like, they should, because that's a real human experience. And we need to teach them words for it so that instead of muting those things with the dopamines, the drugs, the whatever, they're actually capable of saying, this is how I'm feeling. Here's my toolbox of how to deal with this in a healthy way. So I hope that we're getting, to that point, but you're right. Healing comes in community, not in isolation.
Yeah. And, more and more, we all want it. And I hope these conversations will help people identify. I don't think, and this goes back to when I said 4 years ago, you threw out this answer, the greatest joy as a race director, vulnerability. I'm like, what on earth? But today I get that. And at that time I needed it. I knew that was missing in my life, that space. I just didn't know what it was. Now I'm hopeful in conversations like this, as we start identifying it and talking about it, that folks will have their own aha moments. I know in the last couple of years, my writing has become far more I say for the longest time, I wrote around the edges of my life, more and more no, this is me. And I'll have people reach out, and it's not because they resonate with the words as much as they resonate with this willingness to write inside the edges of life. And not because I'm doing it, it's because what I end up picking up, they want that space. They want that safe space to be able to write, to talk, to share about. No, this is who I really am. I want to be able to do that without feeling or receiving shame. I just want to be me. That's what. And I go back to what you said again. I 100%. One of the religion-wise, and especially from this Christian faith standpoint, so many people get it wrong right from the very first chapters in the Bible. This idea that, God created all of this, and he just kept saying, oh man, this is good. I can picture him. He's like, this is good. This is good. This is good. And then he created us. He created me and you. And then he stepped back and said, this is very good. He was on fire with the goods, very good. And see, there's this narrative out there, so then Adam and Eve sinned and they made this mistake. And so there's this narrative, then God changed his mind. This thing all screwed up, they're bad now. But God never said that. He never came back. And in fact, he got with them. He worked with them in a loving, caring way. He didn't abandon them and say, they're all screwed up now, they're all bad. He maintains, no, this is very good. In fact, he sent a son to remind us just how very good and worth it we all are. But I think shame, we get these messages that I'm bad, that if I don't perform well, I'm bad. If I don't live up to this expectation, I'm bad. And And I do think a lot of that gets driven by this faith component, religion.
And it's in a lot of, I mean, in a lot of, the Protestant faith. I mean, a lot of the faiths have their legalistic bounds and rules. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did bad.
Yeah.
And what I've noticed is in my life, a huge correlation between vulnerability and my ability to move out of shame. So, and into appropriate guilt. I mean, there are moments when I don't show up the way I know I need to show up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I missed the mark on that. I'm sorry, I missed the mark on that.
Yeah.
And the more comfortable I am with who I am and the more rooted I am in that, the more I'm able to acknowledge, take responsibility, and move on instead of getting stuck in the I am bad. I am that choice I made. And that is then that conscious incompetency that has to now become an unconscious competency where we don't sit in the pit, where we're able to move on. And my kids are both so different. Lucy is able to acknowledge quickly, oh, yeah, I should have done that differently. And she moves on. But Levi, he is my feeler and he will spiral. And weeks later, he'll go back to sitting in the pit of I am this. And so shift wherever we are, we all, shame gets put on us by a lot of different spaces. But even in work stuff, I have found a lot of freedom in being able to, in working relationships, just be like, man, you know what? I told you I was going to get you that video and I am late. And I am sorry that I have not been a person of my word. Will you please forgive me? And just in that moment, asking for forgiveness, and it's so, again, countercultural that people are like, sure, of course I do. It's not that big of a deal. Well, it is to me because being a person of my word is a big deal. And so I want to make sure that I can deliver next time. In every moment that we choose to not sit in shame, but with vulnerability, move through appropriately, we create a deeper, meaningful relationship. Because now the person that I was able to just to be like, man, I missed the mark, like there's trust then that gets created, and relationships that flourish are built on extreme trust. So all of these things connect with each other. And if we're going to get out of this pit that we're in of anger or apathy, we're going to have to first do the work personally. Instead of pointing fingers, it's, don't look at the plank in someone else or the speck in someone else's eye when you have a plank in your own. Man, my dad loves to remind me about that.
Yeah.
And so, what's my plank? And I will never get that plank out of my eye.
Right.
There will always be something I need to work on and grow through. And until I am doing that hard work in a continuous, intentional way, I am never going to experience the ability to be in relationship with people who are like me or different than me. Yeah. And none of us are going to be able to come together in connectedness or peace until we do the personal hard work of vulnerability, authenticity, moving out of shame, and being empathetic.
Yeah, no, I've said a lot that, and again, this journey I've been on has been a journey of having a better understanding of me, kind of looking at the story of my life and how that shaped where I am today. But probably the biggest byproduct of that is the more you get to working understanding you, the better you get understanding others. So I love that you talk about this. The more you get curious about who am I and how did I get here, the more open you are to granting that curiosity to somebody else as well. I do want to, and I'm going to be sensitive of your time. I know you're crazy busy, but I do want to talk about one other area that I know is related, She Ventures. So tell us a little bit about She Ventures, how Jenny Baker, Georgia Jewel, ultra race director, branched out into this She Ventures world.
Oh, the same way I branch out into a lot of things. I experienced being in the outdoors and not feeling welcomed, not feeling worthy, feeling inadequate. And so I'm like, I don't want to feel that way anymore. I don't want anybody else to feel that way anymore. So why don't we create a space that is opposite of that? So we have family property. We open it up to women and now young girls every year. We bring them in. We have zero expectations that they know anything about the outdoors. So they don't even have to have a tent, and they can sign up for She Ventures. We'll have a tent for them, a sleeping bag for them. We have companies who come in and we'll let them demo hiking shoes, trail running shoes. We provide everything. And we just say, just come be with us for the weekend. And then creating these activities, rock climbing, mountain biking, paddleboarding, it's just the same as the Georgia Jewel. We create meaningful spaces where there are no expectations of being anything other than who you are and who you want to be in that moment. And so we tell women, if you need to come for the weekend and sleep in a hammock for a day, come sleep in a hammock for a day, if that is restorative to you. If you want to come and do all these fun adventure activities, come and do these fun adventure activities. And if you fail, I mean, I am terrible at rock climbing, like really bad at rock climbing. I don't know why. I'm just not very good at it. But I'll tell you what, like, I'm going to try, and then I'm going to laugh at myself when I fall 5,000 times, and I'm going to have a great time doing it, because it's not about reaching the top of that rock climbing face. It's about being with other women in an authentic way in a beautiful outdoor space, and just having my soul restored through relationship. So that's how She Ventures. It's just this overflow of the things that I love and what I want other people to experience in life too. And if I can use what we've been blessed with to be a blessing to other people, then I feel like that's what we need to be doing.
Yeah, I always I think I love the pictures of She Venture weekends even more than Georgia Jewel pictures, because Georgia Jewel, it is a space for any runner to show up. But a lot of the folks who show up look like runners. I mean,
yes.
I'm an exception, and they're for good reason. It's not easy. It's a very tough task. So you have to have some capacity to get out there and do it. She Ventures weekend, like, I see those pictures, and it is diversity at its best. Sizes, colors, just capacities. But there's the common denominator is that you can feel the joy in the pictures. Like, you can feel that people are experiencing something that they probably once felt unsafe about in a very safe space. And, Jenny, one thing that you've said over and over here today, and it's in your nature, and I hope it's a nature we'll all get better at. Like, almost all of your stuff, you start with this idea of creating this space where we can meet people where they are, creating this space where people can feel safe enough to maybe be more vulnerable than they've ever been. And I think that's critical. Like, you just can't go into a relationship, me and you, and say, okay, let's write down the recipe for what are the steps we need to take. Here's our lines. This is what'll make it. It always starts with creating a safe space. That safe space always starts with, I'm going to be better at listening and understanding than I am at directing and telling you where you should and how you should be acting in this space. That empathy that you kept talking about. So,
and it does cost, it does come with a personal cost. I mean, anytime we are creating that space, there are some people who choose to come into that space and they don't have the tools in the toolbox to contribute to the relationship in a healthy and a helpful way.
Yeah.
And so they take more than they give, and they take 5 times as much as they give. And sometimes they take so much that it hurts. Yeah. And yet we have to be committed enough to knowing that a life of serving and love is it's worth it. It is worth those painful moments and that cost, because we reap what we sow. And so every time we choose to sow those seeds of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control,
Yeah.
at some point we will be on the receiving end of those things.
Yeah.
So I would, I would be sad if I didn't at least acknowledge, like, it does come with a cost. It is hard work sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I will just say, as we kind of wrap it up, I am grateful for who you are and the way you go about doing it, because you do create communities and opportunities for people to truly explore who they are and truly explore the joy that truly can be found in meaningful relationships. And as wonderful and beautiful as you are and your family are, your commitment to doing that far transcends you and your family. It does become, when people talk about Georgia Jewel and they talk about community, that's probably the truest sense I know of somebody applying community to it. And we all come down there to see Team Baker, but there's a much broader and more meaningful each other that absolutely takes place there. And you all have worked hard to create that. I look forward to, like, I've had folks say, like, what's your race schedule this year? I said, I only got one. It's the same one every year. It's Georgia Jewel. I'm going back. But it's become more like a family reunion. It's been a place to go back and relive real meaningful memories. And it's I don't know, it's just a great space to go do life. So
I'm a great group of people. I mean, where else in this life, there are a few, I know they exist, but there are a few spaces that exist where you can meet somebody who's in a different state and become such great friends with them, where I could call you and ask you for anything and you would drop everything in a moment to come help our family, and vice versa. And that is such a gift. So thank you for being part of that gift.
Well, it wouldn't take much to get me to move in with your family. So
I'm telling you, I said that at the beginning of this conversation. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, well, I gotta get a couple of boys through high school. I'm not saying college. Once they're through high school, I'm gonna.
That's right.
Yeah. So
I mean, we have high schools in Tennessee.
Oh well.
I know it's surprising.
Yeah. Jenny, thank you so much. You are you're a definition in many ways of this idea of weathering together. You invite people into weathering together. You are kind of, like you just said, you'd be the first person I'd reach out to if I needed to weather a storm with somebody. So I am just so appreciative and grateful for you. So thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah, and I'm grateful for you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Always love the conversation.
Well, I hope you found as much meaning as I found in that conversation with Jenny. I'm glad you could come in, step in, watch, or listen, whatever you're doing, to the conversation we had about relationships. Jenny and I talked an awful lot about relationships we've experienced in our lives, but I think a lot of you listening, watching, could probably see yourself, feel yourself, sense your own longing in some of the conversations that we had. So it's my hope that continued conversations like this on the Weathering Together podcast, like I said, I think this conversation with Jenny in many ways sums up my vision, my desire for what this podcast and these conversations become, and how I hope that they will influence and impact folks that come, sit, and be a part of them. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for being a part of it. And I welcome you to check out weatheringtogether.com. You'll find this episode. You'll find all the back episodes, which today is one, but a wonderful conversation I had with Maren Scalone. So check it out, weatheringtogether.com. And again, thank you for listening in. And until next time, y'all be good. Thanks.